doctrines of God's grace are my life, the source of my life, the joy of my life, the sustaining foundation of my life, the hope, the end, the goal of my life. These have been the center of my pastoral ministry at Bethlehem Baptist Church for the last 33 years. It's a downtown church, not a suburban church. They have their own unique problems, but a church just a couple of blocks from the Metrodome, the NFL stadium, in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. We've had our share of rocks through the windows of our house and brawls in our front yard and shots across the street and bikes jerked from under our kids. But the center of God's will is the safest place in the world if God's will is a sovereign, gracious will. So these streets and this neighborhood and all this diversity and all these endless problems have been the proving ground, the trenches for the doctrines of grace for the last 33 years. And I have no doubt in my mind that what has carried us through is the preciousness and the truth of the doctrines of grace. Another name for the doctrines of grace is Calvinism. And we all know that for many, Calvinism has a bad connotation. People think Calvinists are cold or logic-driven or more systematic than biblical. They're prayerless. They don't believe in evangelism or missions. But historically, and in my experience, that's simply not the case. For my church, for the disabled in our church, for the young and for the old, for the suffering and for the well, these doctrines have been our life. And for me personally, they are a sweet treasure. I came to Bethlehem because of the absolute sovereignty of God's grace. I was teaching in college and writing a book on Romans 9, which is filled with the sovereignty of God. And I heard God say, I will not just be explained and analyzed, I will be heralded in all my great sovereignty. So I resigned at Bethel and I took this 109-year-old dying downtown church because I wanted to know, I wanted to see what would happen if week in and week out I heralded the glorious, great sovereignty of God. I wanted to see its effects on the whole range of life and the whole range of human experience, the children and the teenagers and the adults, the married and the single, the happy and the broken and sad, every kind of ethnicity and every kind of socioeconomic status. I wanted to see, will this vision of God work across all the range of people? On January 1st, 1984, I preached a sermon on Isaiah 6, and I simply wanted to lift up the absolute, beautiful, glorious, sovereign holiness of God. And so I preached the sermon, little knowing that sitting in the audience was a family. And these daughters, they had just found out, had been molested for 2 years by an uncle, wasn't part of our church. 2 weeks later, the husband came to me when I found out about this, and we were trying to surround them as a church to care for these little girls and make sure all the appropriate authorities were notified. He said to me, John, if it hadn't been for the greatness of the glory of the holiness of God in our lives from your sermon, I don't think we could have survived these weeks. So I'm deeply convinced from that and 1,000 other illustrations, these doctrines really are meant to be lived and loved in the worst and the best of times. If you love the doctrines of grace and you live them and you commend them to others, you can count on it. Your turn is coming. You're going to have your own tragedy. So in 2005, the doctor said to me, you've got prostate cancer. Once you come in, we'll talk it over with you and your wife, see what your options are, and 6 weeks later, surgery. Between the diagnosis and the surgery were the sweetest months of fellowship with God I've ever known. It's just the way it works, right? The hardest times of our lives turn out to be the best times of our life because God is good, God is gracious, God is precious when we're about to lose our life. The way God uses our tragedies is by making us a blessing to other people in them. So he's never, ever wasting any of our suffering. Whether you're a pastor or a teacher or a mom or a dad or a single person in a small group with friends and you want to commend the doctrines of God's grace, remember they are infinitely valuable because not only do they carry a person through tragedy, through suffering, but they also, we found this at Bethlehem hundreds of times, they empower people. They embolden people to do risk-taking, radical, sacrificial acts of love, like missions or urban ministries. So it's not just getting through the worst times. It's being willing to leave some of the so-called best times in order to do the really great things of love for God. So I pray that God will make the doctrines of grace your life, the source of your life, the sustaining foundation of your life, the joy and the hope of your life.